Out of the many games in my shamefully large backlog, there are two that I always keep coming back to. And its sequel.
The time has come to face your failures.
Let's see what makes these games so great and if we can find some good alternatives. A game that in many ways is very similar to Darkest Dungeon is Circus Electric. Let me phrase it a different way. If you want Darkest Dungeon in a steampunk setting, and instead of men-at-arms there's clowns, fireblowers and lion tamers, then this is the game for you. For instance, when I booted up the game, it asked me to go to the train card and hire some new performers, which were all neatly lined up along the edge of the screen, exactly like the hiring card in Darkest Dungeon. Or here, during my first battle. And let me, for your convenience, lay next to it a random battle scene from the Darkest Dungeon. As you can see, it looks eerily familiar. Not that this is a bad thing, it does just enough to still feel its own. Take the setting. This game takes place after an event called The Maddening. Something that's driven most people insane, and only you and your troupe of performers can stop it by putting on shows. It's all just so wacky, but it works really well. Literally everything you've seen in the Darkest Dungeon is here. The positioning, the camp, the groups of different characters with different chemistries, and even the stress level is here, although it's called Devotion instead. There are many things that make the Darkest Dungeon special, but if there's one thing that stands out for many people, it is how difficult it is. So aside from some alternatives, here are also some tried and true Darkest Dungeon rules to live by. Rule 1. Light is for wimps. Of the many cool features Darkest Dungeon has, the most underrated has to be the light feature, ignored by most people and only kept at a maximum to avoid stressful situations. But I'm of the firm belief that the only way to play is by walking around in the pitch black, maximizing that loot and increasing your hit chances. There are some small drawbacks of course, like constantly getting ambushed and surprised, but that's nothing compared to all that extra loot you'll be gathering, but likely won't be bringing home because you'll be party wiped, but more on that later. But of all the things that make Darkest Dungeon so unique, the battle system has to be one of the most important ones. Take Iratus Lord of the Dead, for example. A game you should play purely for the fact that you are an actual real-life bad guy. How often does that happen? You are in fact a necromancer trying to take over the world. You create minions from scrap and body parts gathered in battle, and like any necromancer worth his salt, you use brains to upgrade their abilities. It's all very on topic. Oh, and of course the battle system I mentioned earlier. We have our familiar 4-person setup with position-sensitive attacks. There's even a stress system, but curveball. You are the one causing all the stress because you are the bad guy. Now I have to be honest, this game is not nearly as good as Darkest Dungeon. The systems work well together and there are lots of cool minions to build with imaginative attacks. There's leveling and spells and lots of stuff to do, and even the graphics look decent. But it's just not as well tied together. In Darkest Dungeon I care about the story and my explorers, and making it back to my hamlet is a welcome reprieve from the dungeon crawls. Where in Iratus you just move from battle to battle, upgrade your minions and build some new ones. You don't really get attached to anything or anybody, or for that matter care much about the story. It feels a bit more empty, or at least it did to me. It's still a great game in its own right, especially if you're just in it for the battles. Rule 2. Never retreat. The real Darkest Dungeon player never retreats. The going might get tough, but the tough get going, as they say. Yes, maybe that high-level nun you've invested so much time and money in got wiped out by that straight arrow, but that's no reason to leave behind all that loot you've been carrying. Tactical retreats are not an option. This is an all-or-nothing kind of game. I say, better to risk a party wipe than come crawling back to camp with your tail between your legs with a bunch of negative traits. Am I right? Alternative number 3. Deep Sky Derelicts, another game where retreat is not an option. I love this game, maybe not as much as Darkest Dungeon, but it's close. This is basically the Darkest Dungeon alternative in space. As the story goes, you're living the hard life of what I think is best described as a space scavenger. Homeless, planetless, living on the scraps you gather from derelict spacecrafts. But then opportunity comes knocking. The possibility to gain citizenship and settle down on a hospitable planet if only you can find that mythical mothership everybody has been searching for years. What an opportunity. And that's where you come in. Full of hope and ambition, ready to take on the world. Gathering clues in derelict spaceships, doing side quests for money, and of course, battling space baddies in the Darkest Dungeon-like battle system. All of this in the inhospitable vacuum of space. Which means you need to keep an eye on your energy meter while you explore and battle, or you too will become a footnote in history. But remember, never retreat, because that's for wimps. Roguelikes. Remember in elementary school those dares where you had to say Bloody Mary in the mirror 3 times? And then she'd appear behind you and unalive you? Well, it turns out she's not that bad. Really just misunderstood. If you're on her good side. I mean, Dracula, the Headless Horseman, and many others are all just big old softies. In Roguelikes, you, as the devil, control these and many other minions to take back the world after having been defeated by Van Helsing and his demon slayers. Again, we play as the bad guy, which, funnily enough, I mentioned never happens. Like the 3 games before, this too has largely adopted the Darkest Dungeon-like battle system. It's not exactly one-to-one, position for example don't really matter, and battles take place in 3D space. But the overall feel and similarities are many, and playing as the devil has a few benefits, as you might imagine. You can, as it were, cheat, reducing the enemy's health for example, or swapping their buffs for my debuffs, and even convince enemies to betray their own. This cheat function can be used both on the battlefield and the dungeon-like map screen. On a map it can be used for example to skip certain events or sway the dice roll in your favor. This of course doesn't come for free, and it uses up diabolical essence, which is quite important because if you run out, it's game over. So it becomes a nice risk and reward feature. Rule 3. Stress is your friend. This might sound strange, but hear me out. Stress, for the uninitiated, is a great feature in the Darkest Dungeon, where, just like in real life, threatening, scary and dangerous situations give you stress. If you have too much of it, boom. Your resolve is being tested. Now, many people see this as bad. But you're wrong. This feature separates the wheat from the chaff. Yes, this might happen, or this, and then this, but also occasionally you'll get something like this. So yes, you might lose some, but the strong will survive, and in the end your party will be better for it, if they survive. Speaking of survival, here are a few recommendations that might seem weird at first, because they're really not much like the Darkest Dungeon. Take Frostpunk for example, a post-apocalyptic city builder about a civilization trying to survive in a frozen wasteland. It's grim, dark, and you will lose people, many of them. And I think you can probably see where I'm going with this. In terms of feel and that raw sense of hopelessness, like for example when the heat generator that everything revolves around in this game is down to its last bit of coal, but the forecast shows -40-degree temperatures for the next day. How are you going to keep your people alive? I have that feeling a lot in Darkest Dungeon. Frostpunk is like that. Every time you take a step forward, say you finally got your people out of the cold into uncomfortable tents, you also take 2 steps back. Because as it happens, you took just a bit too long and civil unrest is threatening your society that's hanging on by a thread. The second game in the category has nothing to do with Darkest Dungeon. Deepest Chamber. This is one in a wave of new old-timey dungeon crawlers. You know the ones. First person, turn-based, you move from chamber to chamber, the monsters take a turn, you take a turn. I'm not exactly sure why this game makes me think of Darkest Dungeon, but it does. You and your band of brave explorers head underground to find a long-lost city that was magically taken underground for its protection, but never heard from again. Yes, I agree, it sounds a lot like Atlantis, but still the story is interesting enough. Plus it gives you a good reason to explore and encounter all these surprisingly well-designed monsters and criminals. Take a look at some of these designs. The character art is on point. The gameplay itself is no slouch either, and I think that's probably what landed this game on the list. It's your classic turn-based strategy, your band of explorers against one or multiple Lovecraftian horrors that you encounter in the deeps, with a few caveats that make things more interesting. When you play a card, the cards adjacent to it get boosted. But since you only have 3 actions, it becomes an interesting little puzzle to choose which attacks or defenses you play first to boost others. Nice little game, worth checking out. Rule number 4. Party wipes are a thing of beauty and the game's best feature. Like the stress feature, most people will see party wipes as an unwelcome feature or addition to the game. But I say only noobs and wimps think this way. Party wipes like stress are a good thing. Yes, you might lose 4 of your best explorers in one fell stroke, putting you back 10 hours, but also it extends the runtime of this immaculate game. Instead of finishing after a measly 40 hours, you get to grind for an additional 40 before even thinking you're getting close to the end. How is that not great? Speaking of party wipes and their positive effects on society as a whole, let's talk about The Last Spell. Honestly, I wasn't expecting much from this game when I first started it, other than the fact that this was recommended to me as a game I should play if I liked Darkest Dungeon. The Last Spell is almost certainly going to be way different than you expect it to be. Here's the story, and then I'll tell you what I thought was going to happen. The world is yet again doomed. Mages have been messing around with magic, as they do, and this magic draws in monsters from other dimensions. The mages recognize the error in their ways, and in a last-ditch effort to save the world, they try to ban all magic and monsters with one last spell. hence the name. The monsters of course get word of this and try to stop the mages who are doing this, and it's your job to stop them. This is a turn-based mass monster extermination hero slayer with a touch of tower defense, and it is so much fun. It all starts with your setup phase. You place defenses to tunnel the monsters into one direction. Upgrade your heroes where possible. Maybe upgrade a building, get more mana, and finally place your heroes in their desired location. Some are melee based, some are spellcasters, and others use arrows. So your placement is important. Also, all of them can be upgraded and at higher levels and dual class. Very nice. Then the fun really starts. The horde approaches and it is time to lay down the law in turn-based fashion. Using big AoE spells to take down a mass of monsters and picking off the stragglers with bow and arrow feels really good. The loop of upgrading and slaying monsters is also very compelling. Highly recommended if this sounds at all interesting. Rule number 5. Don't let the narrator get into your head. The narrator is one of the best features in Darkest Dungeon. Just listen to this.
Mortality clarified in a single strike.
But the real hardcore Darkest Dungeon player knows not to let him get to you. This guy's all full of good cheer and fun, but sneakily behind the scenes he's messing with you, trying to get into your head.
And now the true test. Hold fast or expire.
Throwing doubt and despair. To that I say, don't let him. Be your own man or woman and body wipe on your own terms. These last two recommendations don't have a cool narrator who is insidiously trying to get into your head, but WilderMyth does have another feature that makes it stand out from the crowd. Freedom of choice. Just the other day on this run with my 3 adventurers, I lost an eye, transformed in some sort of clawed monster creature, lost the right side of this girl's face, but also, despite all that, 2 of them got married. This game is chock full of randomized interactions and choices. Sometimes it's something silly like a conversation about what they'd like to do after all this is over. I'm going to be a rancher, but often it's more substantial. Like the eye I lost, making the guy survive but permanently maimed with reduced accuracy, but one hell of a story to tell. And let me tell you, all this really gets you attached to your characters. Then lastly, one of my personal favorites. A game I both love and hate in equal measure. Building your own mercenary company in this cartoony looking turn-based tactics game might seem like a breeze, but I found it to be quite challenging. Even just getting through a battle is tough, and losing one of your mercenaries in a seemingly easy battle, because that new guy you hired on a whim, who swore he fought before, was asleep at the wheel. Losing one of your veterans who'd been with you from the beginning is head. Like Darkest Dungeon, this game is difficult and unforgiving, but like WilderMyth before this, building a legacy and with it a mercenary company in this cutesy but complex fantasy world is a lot of fun. Alright, that's it. 9 great games to play if you're looking for something similar to the Darkest Dungeon. Although, let's be fair, there is nothing as good. Also, check out this for 11 of the best XCOM-like games. And this one if you're interested to see how the Claw 8, Ally, and Steam Deck hold up against the latest AAA games. And I hope to see you in the next one.